In the dead of winter, when Ashbrook was buried under a storm so vicious it could swallow a man whole, a German shepherd stepped into the snow and changed everything. Elias Grant, once a special operations officer, now just another worn-down worker trying to survive, thought he'd left danger behind. But the night the hunters came, he learned that some ghosts don't stay buried. And in that moment, when the wind howled like a living monster and bullets tore through the darkness, it wasn't a weapon or training that saved him. It was valor. A dog who didn't just protect his family, he fought for them. He bled for them. He became the last light in a winter meant to break them. If you believe loyalty still exists, if you believe heroes sometimes have 4 legs and a heartbeat, then this is a story you cannot miss. Hit subscribe to follow more gripping tales of courage, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their dogs. Your next unforgettable story begins now. Winter pressed against Ashbrook like an old ghost breathing frost on every window pane. The tiny, time-worn town, its wooden porches sagging and its chimneys coughing out tired smoke, looked as though it had grown weary of surviving another season. On the outskirts, where the cracked road bent toward a series of abandoned quarries, stood a narrow cedar house patched together with stubbornness and hope. Inside lived Elias Grant, a 50-year-old former special operations officer who now worked odd mechanical jobs around town. Elias had the sturdy, carved-from-oak look of men who had been shaped by storms long before weather ever touched them. His jaw was blunt and heavy, shadowed with a few days' neglect. Silver threaded through his once black beard and hair, leaving him with the rugged appearance of someone carrying both years and regrets. His shoulders remained broad, his movements measured and tactical even in domestic routines. Those habits were remnants of a life that no longer held any medals, only memories he tried not to revisit. He stood by the frosted window, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug, the other unconsciously rubbing the faint scar that cut across his left eyebrow. That scar didn't come from combat, but from a collapsed training ramp years ago, a freak accident that had cost him his commanding role and forever altered the compass of his life. He still woke some nights with the phantom echo of splintering wood and the shouted warnings of men he could no longer help. The scent of warm bread drifted from the kitchen, pulling him back to the present. Marlene Grant, his wife of 21 years, moved with quiet purpose between the counter and the stove. Marlene was a soft contradiction to the harshness of winter, shorter than Elias by a full head, lean in a gentle way, her movements graceful, like someone raised around music rather than hardship. Her chestnut hair, flecked with early strands of gray, was tied in a loose braid that fell down her back. Her skin was pale from the cold, but always warm-toned around the eyes, which were a deep hazel full of patient strength. Marlene had once worked as a hospice nurse, a job that carved emotional scars deeper than any blade. Losing a young patient she had grown attached to had marred her optimism, but it had also given her a kind of fierce tenderness, a quiet vow to hold close whatever life had not taken away. Elias admired that about her, the way she loved as though healing something in herself each time. At their feet lay the warmest heartbeat in the home. Valor, a 4-year-old German shepherd with a coat of storm gray and charcoal black that made him look carved from the winter itself. Valor was large for his breed, muscular, alert, his ears perpetually tilted slightly forward as though always listening for something the world was too quiet to voice. A faint streak of white brushed his muzzle, giving him the dignified look of a seasoned warrior despite his youth. He wore intelligence in his amber eyes, carrying a seriousness that made strangers assume he had been trained for police work even before knowing Elias's past. Valor adored Marlene with gentle devotion, but followed Elias like a shadow, mirroring his steps, his pace, and his moods. Tonight, Valor's tail lay flat against the floor, his posture tense, nose lifted toward the draft under the back door. Elias noticed. "He's been on edge since dusk," he murmured. Marlene set down a loaf to cool. "Maybe he hears coyotes again? He'd bark. This is different." Elias watched Valor's muscles coil and uncoil. Marlene turned, studying her husband's face, a face that rarely revealed fear but often revealed intuition. "Should I be worried?" "Not yet," Elias answered, but his tone carried the shadow of an old instinct. Hours passed with the storm thickening outside, snow battering the roof in waves of icy percussion. Ashbrook's narrow streets fell silent under drifts that swallowed tires and bent lampposts beneath their weight. Only the wind moved, moaning through cracks like it mourned something lost. By late night, the Grants sat together near the old iron stove, reading by lamplight while Valor slept, if one could call his vigilant dozing sleep. He shifted every few minutes, ears twitching at sounds beyond the snow. It was close to midnight when the sudden power flicker dimmed the room before steadying again. Elias's shoulders stiffened immediately. "Transformers freezing," Marlene said, trying to sound casual. "It happens every heavy winter." "Not like that." Elias set his book down, his body leaning forward in the way predators lean toward danger rather than away. Valor rose before Elias did. The dog's hackles lifted, a bristling line along his spine, and he stared at the back door with a low rumble vibrating through the wood floor. Marlene whispered, "Elias." Elias stood. "Stay behind me." He walked to the window, expecting to see nothing but swirling white. Instead, the storm had thinned for a moment, a strange, narrow corridor of clear visibility carved through the falling snow as if the wind had bent to reveal something it wanted him to see. And it had. Up on Ashbrook Hill, where the abandoned quarry opened like a frozen wound, there was a flicker of light. Not lightning, not a lantern, a pulse, once, twice, slow, deliberate. Elias's breath caught in his throat. He knew signals, and that was one. Valor let out a sharp bark, the kind that meant alert, not threat, not prey, alert. "Someone's up there," Elias whispered. Marlene stepped beside him. Why would anyone be out in that cold? Elias didn't know, but he felt something stir inside him, an echo of the man he once was, trained to act, trained to move toward trouble instead of waiting for it. But another voice inside reminded him that he was not that man anymore. He had a wife to keep safe. A small, fragile life they'd built together. Responsibilities. Yet Valor was already pacing toward the door, scratching lightly as though insisting the night was calling them. "Elias, don't," Marlene said softly. "We don't know what it is." "Exactly," Elias murmured. "And that's why I need to check." He grabbed his heavy coat, worn leather boots and headlamp. Marlene's voice trembled despite her calm expression. "Please don't go far." He stopped long enough to touch her cheek. "I won't. I promise." Valor pressed against his leg as Elias opened the door, stepping into the storm. Snow stung like shards against his skin. The wind clawed at his coat, trying to push him back toward the safety of the house, but Elias pushed forward, Valor a silent ghost beside him. The light on the hill flickered again, once, twice. Elias paused in the middle of the yard, the silence pressing in tight. Something was wrong about the rhythm. The pulse was too even, too mechanical, almost as if it were timed. Valor growled low, staring toward the quarry. Elias squinted through the white veil, heart hammering strangely. There, at the far ridge of the quarry, a tall silhouette stood perfectly still. The figure did not move with the wind, did not hunch against the cold, did not seem human. Then the light blinked again. Once, twice, and the silhouette vanished, swallowed not by snow, but as if it stepped out of existence. Elias froze. Valor's bark shattered the night, and from somewhere deep in the quarry, something answered him back, something that did not sound like an animal. The wind clawed at Elias's coat as he climbed the slope toward the quarry, snow swirling around him like restless spirits still unwilling to settle. Valor stayed ahead, moving with steady resolve, his gray and charcoal coat blending into the storm until he looked carved from the very winter itself. Elias trusted the dog's instincts more than his own training tonight. Something had called them here, no, drawn them, and Elias could feel a silent tension twisting like wire beneath his ribs as he followed. The flickering signal he had seen earlier was gone, swallowed by the storm, but the echo of it stayed in his mind like a faint pulse. Valentine Ridge Quarry had been abandoned for decades after a mining collapse killed 6 workers. The town never recovered from the tragedy. The quarry was left to rot, a cold crater of rust and sorrow. Elias's boots crunched through hardened snow as he moved deeper into the hollow. The cold sharpened his senses, waking old instincts he had tried to bury. He kept scanning the terrain, ridgelines, shadow pockets, potential sniper perches, though he hated that the old habits came back so easily. Valor stopped suddenly near a rock outcrop, tail stiff, ears pointing forward. Elias lowered himself, placing one hand on the dog's flank. "Easy," he whispered. Valor pressed his nose toward a cluster of boulders, letting out a low growl, deep, resonant warning. Elias stepped forward. The snow shifted. Something moved. A body slumped sideways behind the rock. Elias inhaled sharply. The man was half buried in snow, his breath shallow, one glove missing. He looked around 40, tall but gaunt, with messy blonde hair matted by ice and blood. A thick, unkempt beard covered the lower half of his face, streaked with gray. His skin was pale to the point of translucence, the kind of pallor that belonged to someone who had seen too many winters, or too much fear. His eyes fluttered open as Elias knelt beside him. They were startling, icy blue, sharp with a mix of pain and urgency. "Hold on," Elias said, examining him quickly. Frostbite on the fingers, a deep gash along the ribs, bruising on the neck. Someone had grabbed him hard. "You're injured, but you're not dying. Tell me what happened." The man struggled to speak, his breath a thin fog. I tried to run, couldn't." His voice cracked. Elias leaned closer. "Who did this?" The man's gaze flicked toward the dark tree line. "Hunters," he rasped. "Not animals, men, hunting. People." Elias stiffened. Valor's growl deepened. "Why?" The man swallowed, his throat working painfully. "They're in Ashbrook. Tonight, more coming." His body convulsed with a violent shiver, and then he sagged forward, consciousness slipping. Elias grabbed his shoulder. "Stay with me," the man whispered one last phrase before collapsing fully. "They marked me. Don't let them see the mark." Elias's pulse hammered. The man's jacket sleeve had slipped, revealing a small black symbol burned into the skin of his forearm, a circle split by a vertical line, surrounded by 3 tiny dots. Elias brushed the snow off the man's arm and grimaced. The scar looked recent, deliberate, branded. Valor nudged Elias with his head, ears pinned back. Elias understood the dog's agitation. Something was wrong, something was watching. The wind carried a faint vibration, almost too low to hear. Not an animal sound, not a machine. Something controlled. Elias lifted the unconscious man over his shoulder with a grunt, adjusting his weight. "We need to move." Valor barked once, sharp, intentional, and sprinted toward the way they came, checking the path like a trained scout. Elias followed quickly, the man heavy but manageable. His breath came out in harsh bursts as he pushed through knee-deep snow. When they reached the ridge, Elias stopped dead. Lights. 3 sets of headlights cut through the storm from the forest road, sleek white beams sweeping the snowy ground like searching eyes. These were not town vehicles. These were built for off-road pursuit, large frames, narrow wheels, engines that purred cold and controlled. Elias's heart thudded like a drum. "Damn it!" The man had been telling the truth. Valor pressed close to Elias's leg, muscles coiled, eyes locked on the vehicles. A low, almost mournful howl echoed from the woods behind the lights. Not animal, not machine. An eerie blend that made Elias's skin crawl. He whispered, "That's no coyote." One of the vehicle's lights stopped moving and angled directly toward them. Elias ducked behind a ridge of old mining equipment, keeping the injured man shielded. He wasn't armed. No rifle, no pistol. He'd left the house too quickly. He hadn't expected a war to start in his backyard. Valor stayed crouched beside him, every muscle vibrating with readiness, eyes glowing faint in the snow-reflected light. "Stay low," Elias murmured. The vehicles crept closer, engines humming like predatory insects. Someone stepped out of the first vehicle, a tall man wrapped in a heavy black parka. He moved with precision, scanning the area with a practiced sweep. He wasn't a random thug. He was trained. His face was sharp with angles. Thick, dark eyebrows framed narrow eyes that seemed to cut through the night. He had no beard, no softness anywhere, just layers of cold efficiency. He walked with the confident gait of someone accustomed to command, wearing gloves molded perfectly to his hands. "Find the trail," the man ordered, his voice steady and collected even in the storm. 2 others stepped out, One was short and stocky, with a shaved head and a crooked nose, likely broken more than once. The second was taller, thinner, with restless eyes and a nervous tic that tugged at the corner of his mouth. The leader turned to the jittery one. "Miles, scan the ridge. He can't carry the mark-bearer. Far." Miles swallowed hard and pulled a compact device from his coat, something that emitted a faint, high-pitched hum. Elias's breath froze. The stranger he carried twitched against him even while unconscious, as though the sound cut into his dreams. "We need to move now," Elias whispered. He adjusted his grip and pushed forward along the hidden edge of the quarry. The snow softened sound, muffling his steps. Valor guided him through boulders and debris, always ahead, always listening. Halfway down the ridge, a sudden beam of light swept their direction, too close. Elias dropped fast, shielding the stranger's head. Valor pressed flat beside them, tail stiff as a rod. Voices rose behind the light. "I saw something. Probably a deer." "A deer won't carry a full-grown man, Cole." Elias exhaled slowly. They had seconds. He whispered to Valor, "Lead us home." Valor blinked once, understanding, and moved like a wraith through the snow. Elias followed, breath burning in his lungs. The snowstorm thickened suddenly, swallowing visibility. It helped them. It forced the pursuers to slow. Still, Elias knew this was not over, not even close. When he finally reached the tree line near his home, he collapsed behind an old pine. He set the injured man gently against the trunk, checking his pulse, still steady, though shallow. Valor whined softly, ears pinned back again. Elias looked toward the quarry. The lights were gone. Every sound had died, too suddenly, too completely. Elias's stomach dropped. They turned off their engines. The woods were silent, smothered, waiting. Valor's ears twitched toward the dark. Elias swallowed against the cold knot forming in his chest. Something moved between the trees. A figure, broad-shouldered, unnaturally still, silhouetted against the dim snow light. It took one step forward, then another. Elias felt his breath freeze halfway in his throat. The figure stopped, and without a sound, without even the crunch of snow, it raised its head, almost as if sniffing the air. Valor stepped in front of Elias, growling so low the ground seemed to vibrate. The figure's eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. Then, slowly, deliberately, it lifted one hand, pointed directly at Elias, and smiled. The woods held its breath. Elias kept his back pressed against the rough bark of the pine. The unconscious man slumped beside him, while Valor stood rigid at his feet, ears up, shoulders squared, a low rumble vibrating in his chest like distant thunder. The tall figure in the trees did not move. Snow slid off its coat in slow flakes, revealing the man's silhouette, broad-shouldered, standing with unnatural stillness, as if he were carved into the forest itself. And his smile, faint but unmistakably deliberate, lingered in the air like a taunt. Elias's instincts screamed danger, but he forced his breathing to steady. Special operations training had drilled composure into his bones. Even now, after years of normal life had softened the discipline, it sparked back to life in a heartbeat. "Valor," Elias murmured quietly. "Guard." The dog shifted almost imperceptibly, moving one paw forward, blocking the vulnerable man behind them. The snow muffled everything, turning the night into a vacuum where breath and heartbeat echoed too loudly. Then, the figure vanished. No crunch of snow, no shift of shadow. Gone. Elias's spine prickled. The man had not simply walked away. He had disappeared. Not supernatural, no. Elias refused that explanation, but tactical, trained. Someone who knew how to move quietly, how to blend with terrain. Someone like Elias himself. He tightened his grip around the injured stranger and whispered, "Come on, boy. We take him home." Valor led the way, sniffing the wind with precise caution, paws making barely more than a whisper over the snow. Elias followed, head low, body angled to shield the man he carried. The woods felt wrong, as if eyes moved with them, as if the trees themselves were holding secrets they refused to release. When the first lights of Ashbrook appeared through the storm, dim orange glows seeping from windows of tired houses, Elias let out a breath he didn't know he had been holding. His own home stood on the outskirts, its narrow chimney still breathing thin smoke into the night sky. He crossed the yard in 3 long strides and pushed through the door with his shoulder. the familiar warmth inside wrapped around him like a fraying blanket barely holding out the cold. Marlene rushed forward, her braid swinging over her shoulder. Her hazel eyes widened in alarm as she saw the unconscious man slumped against Elias's body. Marlene was the kind of woman who could swallow fear for the sake of others, but tonight her face flickered with real worry. "Elias, what happened? Who is he?" "Don't know yet," Elias said quietly. "But he's in trouble, and so are we." Marlene moved immediately, her instincts as a former nurse taking over. She fetched blankets, warm water, a small med kit they kept for emergencies. She knelt beside the stranger, her hands steady as she assessed his condition. The man's name still unknown, he looked even paler under the cabin lights. Sunken cheeks, wind-burned skin, faint scars around his eyes hinting at past violence. Elias turned to Valor. The dog was pacing already, sniffing the baseboards, checking the windows, tail straight back, a soldier on patrol. "Elias," Marlene whispered, drawing his attention. "His pulse is weak but stable. The cut along his ribs needs cleaning." Elias nodded and moved to bolt the door. He shoved the heavy oak beam into place. The metal latch clanked with a finality that echoed through the cabin. Outside, the wind howled. But beneath it, Elias sensed something else. A rhythm, a movement, a presence. "We're being watched," he muttered. Marlene's hands froze over the stranger's bandages. "By who?" "You don't want the answer." Elias pulled down the old hunting rifle from the wall, checking the chamber with the comfort of muscle memory. Valor sat beside him, staring fixedly at the window as if trying to bore through the glass. "Marlene," Elias said, voice low, "you need to go to the cellar." Her lips parted. "What? No." "This house isn't safe," Elias insisted. "Not tonight." He stepped closer, taking her shoulders gently. "I saw men out there, organized, trained, equipped. They're tracking this man, and they'll track us next." Marlene searched his face, reading the truth there. Her breath trembled in her chest. She wasn't afraid for herself. She was afraid for him. "Elias, please be careful." He kissed her forehead, then guided her toward the trapdoor near the kitchen. Valor followed, blocking the cellar entrance for a moment, as though reluctant to let her go alone. Elias knelt beside him. "Stay with me," he whispered. "I'll need you up here." Valor let out a soft, reluctant sound, then returned to Elias's side. Marlene descended the ladder slowly, the lantern light fading behind her. The sound of the trapdoor closing felt like sealing a promise or a prayer. Elias turned to the unconscious man again. "Whoever you are," he muttered, "you've brought hell to my doorstep." As if on cue, a light swept across the front window, not a harmless passing car. A searching beam, slow and deliberate, cutting across the snow like a blade. Elias crawled toward the window, rifle held close, Valor at his flank. He peered through the narrow crack between the shutters. A vehicle idled at the far end of the street, its engine humming too smoothly, too quietly. Not a truck from Ashbrook. This engine belonged to something designed for pursuit. Then he saw the driver. A woman this time. She stepped out, tall and slender beneath a high-collared winter coat lined with dark fur. Her hair was a sheet of platinum blonde tied in a severe knot, revealing sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of glacier ice. She moved like someone used to giving orders and used to being obeyed. She scanned the houses with a cold detachment that made Elias's gut twist. Her overall presence was steel-wrapped, in elegance, lethal in its calm. She tapped her chest mic. "Sector C scanned," she said in a crisp, low voice. "No movement detected, proceeding to sweep the ridge paths." Elias did not move, barely breathed. Valor didn't either. The woman stood for a moment longer, gaze drifting over the neighborhood before she finally returned to the vehicle. It moved away without leaving tire tracks deep enough to betray its weight, a detail that made Elias's stomach drop lower. They knew how to move through snow. That meant they knew how to hunt. The second the engine faded, Elias backed away from the window, heart pounding. "They're circling the town," he murmured. Valor's ears twitched. Then a distant scream split the night, muffled by snow but sharp enough to stab through bone. Elias's entire body went rigid. It wasn't near his house, but it wasn't far enough either. His mind flashed back to the quarry. The scar burned into the man's forearm, the the figure who disappeared as if it were nothing. "This isn't random," Elias whispered. His voice was barely sound. "They're not hunting him." He looked toward the cellar. "They're hunting anyone he talked to," which meant them. Elias rechecked his rifle, pacing the room with Valor beside him. The injured man stirred on the couch, letting out a faint groan. Elias moved to his side. "Hey," he said roughly, "you need to wake up, now." The man's eyelids fluttered open. Confusion clouded the icy blue beneath them. "Where?" Elias cut him off. "You're safe for now, but the people who marked you, they're in Ashbrook. Who are they?" The man swallowed, pain tightening his jaw. "You shouldn't have found me." "I didn't find you," Elias said grimly. "My dog did." Valor stepped forward, sniffing the man's hand cautiously. The man flinched, not from pain, but from fear. "They're coming," he whispered. "They won't stop." "Why?" Elias demanded. The man's eyes darkened. "Because I escaped." Elias's voice hardened. "Escaped from what?" The man stared blankly at the ceiling for a long moment, as though reliving horrors etched deep into his bones. Then he spoke with a trembling voice. "A program. A hunting program." Elias's heart turned to stone. "You're telling me they're using people as prey?" The man nodded weakly. "And anyone who helps becomes part of the target pool." Elias gritted his teeth. "Great." Valor growled toward the window again, low and insistent. Elias turned. A shadow had just crossed the snow outside. Slow, deliberate, like someone testing the perimeter. Elias raised the rifle, breath steadying itself. "You brought hell here," he muttered, "but I won't let it take us." Outside, the shadow paused, as if listening. Then it leaned closer to the window and whispered Elias's name. The wind roared across Ashbrook like a wounded beast, carrying shards of ice that scraped against windows and walls as if trying to claw their way inside. Elias Grant stood in the dim glow of his workshop lantern, every breath a fog that tasted of iron and fear. He could feel it, like a change in the pressure of the world. The night was about to break open. Valor, his 3-year-old German shepherd with the storm-gray coat and eyes sharp as amber glass, paced beside him with the restless precision of a soldier awaiting deployment. The wound on Valor's shoulder from the earlier scuffle had scabbed over, but the dog moved as if his entire body were tuned to the frequency of danger. He kept glancing toward the windows, ears pricking at sounds Elias could barely sense. Outside, the silhouette of their small timber house crouched under the weight of the storm. Marlene had been taken to the neighbor's storm cellar earlier that evening. Mrs. Ada Whitmore, a thin 70-year-old widow with snow-white hair and gentle hazel eyes. Her clothing always looked one size too big, like she was shrinking, but the world refused to adjust. Fear had hollowed her features, but she still stood straight when Elias left Marlene in her care, insisting she would guard the younger woman, with all the fire my old bones have left. Mrs. Whitmore was no fighter, but she had the fierce loyalty of someone who had outlived a husband, 2 brothers, and the mine collapse of '89. She understood survival. Now, Elias remained alone with Valor in the worsening night, waiting for the storm and the hunters to arrive. Just past midnight, the first sign came. A sharp, unnatural crack cut through the whistle of the wind. Not thunder, not falling ice, wood splintering. Elias grabbed his rifle from the bench and pressed his back to the wall, Valor freezing in place beside him. A faint beam of a flashlight sliced through the swirling snow outside. Then, another. Shadows, human, deliberate, moved against the storm's fury. "That's them," Elias whispered, voice low and steady in the way he only used when the old instincts took over. "Coming in from the ridge." Valor's ears went rigid. A low grunt rolled from deep in his throat, quiet but razor-edged. 3 figures appeared on the hill above, caught in a flash of lightning. Even from this distance, Elias saw the cold precision in their steps. These weren't petty thugs from across the county. These were professionals, mercenaries shaped by conflict, men who had seen death and learned to speak its language. The lead figure, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the unconscious balance of someone who had spent years weaponizing his body, was a man Elias had not yet seen up close. But even from a silhouette, he recognized the type. A lifer. A man built from equal parts discipline and darkness. The second was smaller, wiry, and quick. His movements sliced rather than flowed, abrupt like a blade changing direction. The faint glint of metal under his coat told Elias he carried more knives than guns. Men like that were dangerous, silent, surgical. The third was bulkier, heavy steps leaving deeper prints, likely a breacher, someone who handled explosives or heavy ordnance. His lumbering gait suggested old injuries and a temper that ran hot. Valor's low growl deepened. Elias placed a hand gently on the dog's back. Not yet. The hunters vanished into the whiteout, but Elias knew they were circling the property, testing angles, searching for the best place to break the perimeter. He moved to the back door, Valor at his heel, breath synchronized. Another crack, closer, a broken branch or a boot snapping ice. Then came the bullet. It tore through the side window with a shriek of shattered glass, embedding into the far wall. Valor lunged first, instincts firing faster than thought. His body slammed into Elias's hip, knocking him flat as a second shot punched through the frame where Elias's head had just been. The dog growled, teeth bared, muscles coiled. "Move!" Elias hissed, scrambling behind the workbench. Valor darted with him. The third bullet struck the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, only the storm spoke. Then, Valor gave a sharp bark, a warning, not fear, followed by the heavy thud of boots landing on the back porch. Elias positioned himself low, setting his rifle barrel toward the door. It burst inward just as he expected, kicked clean off its hinges. The breacher came through first, a thick-necked brute with a scar splitting his bottom lip, head shaved raw, eyes dark with fury. His coat was bulky, covering armor. Elias fired once. The bullet clipped the man's shoulder, spinning him sideways, and he crashed into a shelf of old tools with a howl. But the second mercenary slid in almost soundlessly, lean but powerful, with a narrow face framed by a dark beard trimmed close to the jaw. His hair was long at the top, tied back in a short, efficient knot. His eyes, pale blue, unnervingly calm, scanned the darkness, calculating every angle. He held a short-barreled suppressed pistol, the kind used for close-quarters work. He aimed at Elias without hesitation. Valor collided with him first. The shepherd's body was a missile of muscle and fury. He struck the man square in the chest, knocking him backward into the open doorframe. The weapon discharged harmlessly into the floor. Elias surged forward and slammed the man against the wall with his shoulder. The mercenary recovered fast, swinging a knife from his belt, but Elias deflected the strike with his rifle stock, sparks of pain shooting up his arm. "Persistent dog," the man snarled. Valor lunged again, clamping his teeth down onto the man's forearm. Blood darkened the sleeve instantly. Elias used the opening to slam the mercenary's head into the doorpost, not enough to kill, but enough to drop him dazed onto the snow-covered steps. A new sound cut the night, a calm, slow clap. The third man, the leader, stepped into view from the shadows outside. He was tall, with a lean, sculpted frame built through years of ruthless training. His face was sharp, all angles and intention, with a trimmed stubble over a strong jaw. Dark eyebrows framed eyes that were unsettlingly steady. His hair, black streaked slightly with silver, was cropped short in a military fade. But it was his calmness, his eerie, practiced calm, that set him apart. A man like this had made peace with violence long ago. "Impressive," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. 50 years old and still capable of making my men look like amateurs." Elias raised his rifle. The man tilted his head. "You won't have time to pull the trigger." He was right. A gunshot cracked from the side. Another mercenary Elias hadn't seen positioned behind the barn. The round tore through the wooden beam beside Elias's shoulder. Elias ducked instantly. Valor, sensing the shift, spun toward the barn and sprinted into the snow, barking furiously. "No, Valor!" Elias shouted, but the shepherd ignored him, charging toward the flash of the shooter's muzzle. Elias ran after him, heart hammering. The shooter revealed himself, a lanky, sharp-featured man with a crooked nose and haunted eyes, the kind that belonged to someone who had made too many bad decisions and survived all the wrong lessons. His sniper rifle was old but well-maintained, a relic from conflicts no one talked about anymore. He fired again. Valor leapt. Elias saw it all happen in a single frozen heartbeat, the spray of snow, the blur of gray fur, the muzzle flash splitting the dark. Valor collided with the rifleman, knocking the weapon offline. The bullet meant for Elias screamed into the sky instead. The dog latched onto the man's wrist with bone-breaking force. They landed hard, rolling through the icy slush. Elias rushed forward just as the leader shouted, "Take the dog out!" Another mercenary raised his weapon. The gunshot tore through the storm. Valor whimpered, a sharp, broken sound, and stumbled sideways. His legs buckled. Elias dropped to his knees, catching the dog before he hit the snow. Valor's body trembled, his breath ragged, eyes fogging but still trying to focus on Elias's face. "No," Elias whispered. "No, stay with me. Stay." The wind howled again, drowning his voice as the hunters closed in through the swirling snow. The first light of spring crept over Ashbrook like a shy visitor, pale and hesitant, brushing against the snow-gnawed rooftops and the sagging porches of the old mining town. The storm that had nearly swallowed the town whole had passed during the night, leaving drifts shaped like broken waves frozen mid-crash. Elias Grant stood outside the modest brick clinic near the town square, his breath rising in short white wisps. His worn flannel shirt was patched at the elbows, his jeans stiff with old stains, but his posture carried the quiet solidity of a man who had endured the worst winter of both weather and fate. Inside the clinic lay Valor, and the thought tightened his throat every time he inhaled. Marlene stepped out beside him, her coat pulled tightly around her tall, lean frame. The early sun softened the tired lines on her warm brown face. Her hair, thick, wavy, a deep chestnut, fell loosely around her shoulders, a sign of how little she'd slept. Marlene was usually meticulous, careful about her appearance even in poverty, but fear had undone habits she once thought unbreakable. She touched Elias's arm, her voice a quiet rasp. "Dr. Rowan said we could see him now." Elias nodded, unable to speak. The weight of everything, the firefight, the wounded stranger, the fact that Valor had thrown himself between Elias and a rifle barrel, still lingered under his ribs like a bruise. They entered the clinic, its interior smelling faintly of antiseptic and old pine. The walls were lined with framed photographs of Ashbrook's past, miners covered in soot, children in wool hats standing on snowy riverbanks, the old mayor holding a trout larger than a man's arm. Behind the reception desk sat Nurse Lila Marsh, a woman in her late 40s with short silver blonde hair, sharp cheekbones, and quick, intelligent eyes. Her posture was crisp, almost military, though her voice held a softness born from decades of tending to the small tragedies of a forgotten town. She nodded at Elias. "He's stable. Dr. Rowan is finishing the dressing on his ribs." Dr. Silas Rowan appeared moments later, wiping his hands on a towel. He was in his early 60s, tall and stooped at the shoulders, with a gentle weather-worn face framed by a salt and pepper beard. His eyes were soft gray, the kind that had seen pain yet refused to grow cold. Once, long ago, he had worked in emergency rooms of bustling Detroit hospitals, where he'd lost colleagues to burnout and violence. The memory of a shooting in his own ER, where a patient had bled out on the floor, had driven him away from chaos to Ashbrook's quiet. Now, years later, he treated frostbite and broken bones instead of bullet wounds, until last night. "He's a fighter," Rowan said, lowering the towel. "More than most dogs I've treated." He gave a half-smile. "More than most men, too." Elias exhaled through his nose, relief washing through him like warm water. Marlene clutched his hand tighter. Rowan gestured them toward the small recovery room. The door creaked open to reveal Valor lying on a thin blanket atop a low cot. The German shepherd, 3 years old, broad-chested with a thick silver and black coat, was bandaged along his flank. The bullet had bruised deep but had not pierced his ribs. His breathing was soft, steady. His ears twitched when they entered, but his eyes remained closed, exhausted by hours of sedation and stress. His paws twitched faintly as though chasing something in a dream. Marlene knelt beside him, brushing her fingers against the soft fur behind his ear. "Hey, sweetheart," she whispered, "your family's here." Elias sat on the edge of the cot, and something inside him loosened for the first time since winter began. He remembered Valor as a pup, clumsy paws, oversized ears, eyes full of boundless trust. The dog had guarded them all these years through job losses, debt notices, power outages, and the creeping loneliness of being the poor family on Ashbrook's forgotten edge. And now, he had nearly died doing it again. Elias stroked his head. "You did good, boy. Better than I deserve." Outside the window, Ashbrook slowly came alive. Mrs. Holcomb from the bakery lit her morning lamps. Old Mr. Carter shuffled across the street with his cane. Two teenagers in threadbare jackets kicked slush at each other near the bus stop. Normal life, tentative and fragile, was returning. But the shadow of last night lingered in quiet conversations. People whispered about gunshots echoing from the hill, about dark-clad strangers who'd fled into the night. Sheriff Dwight Fuller, a heavy-set man with a bristling salt-gray mustache, had already secured the evidence Elias provided, the small tin box the dying stranger had shoved into Elias's hands before losing consciousness. Inside were USB drives, lists of names, coded symbols pointing to transactions that tied a violent interstate syndicate to a corrupt official in another county. Enough to bring federal agents swarming like hornets, enough to clear Ashbrook of its predators. Sheriff Fuller had thanked Elias with a solemn, heartfelt grip of the shoulder, rare for a man who preferred keeping emotions tucked behind his badge. "Town owes you," he had muttered, "more than I can write in a report." Now Elias watched Valor's chest rise slowly. He was still, utterly still, until the faintest flicker trembled beneath one eyelid. Marlene gasped softly. "Elias, look." Valor's eyes fluttered open, hazy gold catching the dim morning light. Weak, confused, but alive. His tail stirred once, twice, brushing the blanket with a soft, rhythmic thump. Elias leaned forward, pressing his forehead to Valor's. Relief cracked something inside him. The weight of winter, the fear, the gunfire, it all spilled out in a silent exhale. "Welcome back, partner." Valor nudged Elias's chin with his nose, then shifted to look at Marlene. She laughed through tears. "You scared us half to death," she said, wiping her cheeks. "Don't ever do that again." The dog's gaze was bright, almost amused. As if to answer, he lifted one paw and set it on Marlene's knee, claws barely touching, gentle as a whisper. She covered the paw with her hand, steadying its tremble. "We're okay now," she murmured. "All of us." Later that afternoon, Elias stepped outside the clinic to breathe the cool, promising air. The thaw had begun. Snow crept back from the curbs, revealing patches of brown grass flattened by months of cold. A single ray of sunlight pierced the cloud cover, landing on the old mining tower on Ashbrook Hill like a spotlight. For the first time in months, Elias didn't feel the past pressing down on him like an iron weight. Instead, he thought of the future, of Marlene's laughter echoing through their small house, of Valor running strong again, of days not ruled by fear. Marlene came to stand beside him, slipping her hand into his. "We'll be okay, Elias," she said quietly. "We always find a way, and now, we're not alone." Elias squeezed her hand gently. They weren't rich, not by any measure, but they had each other. They had a dog who would charge into gunfire without hesitation, and they had survived a winter that wanted to break them. When they returned to Valor's side, the dog lifted his head, eyes glowing with the warm, amber spark that had carried them through the storm. Spring sunlight filtered through the window, settling on his fur like a blessing. Elias sat beside him again, heart steady. And in that small, humble room of Ashbrook's clinic, surrounded by the faint hum of machines and the soft breathing of the dog who had saved him twice over, a new beginning took root, thin and fragile, yet stubborn enough to bloom where even winter could not kill it. Because in the end, they had each other. And sometimes that was enough to defeat even the harshest season. In the quiet aftermath of Elias, Marlene, and Valor's long winter, one truth rises above the snow. Loyalty, love, and courage are not grand gestures. They're the small, everyday choices we make to stand by one another. Valor fought not because he was trained to, but because he cared. Elias survived not because he was the strongest, but because he refused to give up on the people and the dog who needed him. And Marlene endured because hope, no matter how fragile, can outshine even the harshest season. Their story reminds us that everyone faces winters, loneliness, financial struggle, fear of the unknown, or the quiet battles no one else sees. But like Valor's unwavering gaze or Elias's stubborn heart, we survive by leaning on love, by choosing faith over fear, and by protecting the ones who give our lives meaning. If this journey touched you, inspired you, or simply reminded you that loyalty still matters in this world, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice might be the light someone else needs. And if you'd like to continue exploring stories of courage, companionship, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their dogs, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts and keeps this community growing stronger with every new tale. Thank you for being here. Stay warm, stay kind, and never underestimate the power of a loyal friend.